Hello, everyone. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Jeremy Johansen to the podcast. Jeremy is a friend of mine and someone I helped to buy a home back in 2010. And I wanted him to come and chat with me, and so I could share with you his experience in house hunting and now home ownership. Welcome to the show, Jeremy.
Thank you, Stephen.
Oh, Jeremy, you bought your home 12 years ago. Tell me a little bit
Indeed, I
about,
did.
yeah, tell me about the house. What is your house about? What does it look like? What is features does it have?
I have a nice house with a nice yard, just about the right size for hanging out and enjoying life. So the thing that I like about my house, it's got a small footprint that makes it manageable, but it also is with a lot of different places that you can have things. So one of the unique features of San Leandro is there are a number of houses that have basements. That's unusual for California, but I found one that did just that. So the other aspect that I was looking at was a place where I could have a garden and have a yard, in this case, with chickens.
Wow. All right, so let's go back a little bit. So you live in San Leandro, California, which is a suburb of Oakland, San Francisco area of the Bay Area, and you bought your home in 20 back in 2010. So what got you interested in buying instead of renting? You had been renting before that, yeah, right? You had an apartment?
Before I had an apartment, that is correct. And there are different factors for why I wanted to have a home over an apartment. One of the reasons was simply that I like to have space for a yard and a garden. I like to have animals. And I also like to be able to just have a place that I can call my own and the financial benefit of that.
And when you started looking for started thinking about doing this, were you at all concerned about your how your personal circumstances, your disability, for lack of a better word, would impact how you did the home search?
No,
So tell us a little bit about your circumstance and how it did impact the process in it, and how you looked for homes, how you researched homes.
well, the searching process was, certainly a new experience. Being my first home, I had not gone through that process before, but in effect, if you are familiar with looking for apartments to live, that's not that different. You find a place that's based on a set of criteria. In my case, the price was a factor, the location was a factor, and the basic facilities were a factor. So I started out by narrowing down, where do I want to live? And then from that, uh, you look at, what are the types of houses out there? What are the different room numbers, number of baths, number of rooms? Those kind of criteria we started out with. And then from there, it was just looking at a number of places to start refining what is really important.
One of the reasons, Jeremy, I wanted to have you on my show was because this is a podcast all about accessible housing, and you are a person with significant limitations in your vision. I think you've shared with me that you're not completely blind, that you do have some sensation. So, first of all, can you talk about that, and then talk about how that impacted how you did your home search, if at all?
Yes, that makes perfect sense. I certainly can. My ability is, um, in the sense of how much I can see, partial. I can appreciate sight. I can appreciate the visual and spatial orientation of things. But for me, what's more important is what are the different layouts of a space. So from an accessibility perspective, I have a house that has stairs that by some standards would not be accessible. For me, it's not a problem. I have a house that is small in some places. Also, for me, that's not a problem. I looked at houses that were far distance away from where I work, far distance away from public transit, from the different kinds of facilities, shopping, so forth, that I would want to go to on a regular basis. And they have the advantage of having larger lots, larger, quieter areas. But accessible for me meant being in a place downtown that I could enjoy the benefit of a house with a yard, but also the convenience of being walking distance from BART.
BART is the
So
Bay Area's rapid transit system.
correct. So the access to the train and the bus was an important factor, and also easy access to my place of work.
Wonderful. And can you walk to your place of work, or when you bought your home, could you walk there?
When I bought my home, I had a nice walk to the office. Interestingly enough, then a few years later, the office moved even closer to me. So
Oh, terrific.
it worked out very well.
How thoughtful of them.
Yes,
Now, Jeremy, did you mention the word downtown? Do you walk to the San Leandro downtown from your home?
I do. And
Wonderful.
I'm able to walk to, the local market. I'm able to walk to most of the convenient places that, I'd want to go for, a bite to eat, or even just going for a walk to get out and stretch my legs. It's a very accessible sidewalk. In fact, some of the friends that I know use my block as a way to walk from their house to BART, just because it is open, accessible without a lot of obstacles. So that downtown aspect had benefits that I wasn't necessarily looking for when I, was on the hunt for the perfect home, but really became an asset that I realized I was glad I had after the fact.
Thank you for sharing that, Jeremy. It's really interesting because when I talk about accessibility, general people, lay people think, a wheelchair ramp, right? But there are other layers of it, and it extends to community. Can you speak a little bit more about the sidewalks and what was different about the sidewalks on your street versus ones you'd encountered in your life elsewhere, maybe near your rental that you lived in, that made them better?
Yes, I certainly can. There are sidewalks that have obstacles, and there are sidewalks that do not. And I know the ones that have all the obstacles, and I try to avoid them, quite frankly, because even though they're there, it still becomes a hazard.
What kind
So
of obstacles do you mean, though? What do you mean by obstacles?
by obstacles, I'm referring to poles, to steps and irregularities in the sidewalk,
Ah,
to just bushes and obstructions that, while they're not technically in the way, they make it harder to maneuver, even though they're there.
huh. Interesting.
So, in thinking about the area that I live, uh, one of the benefits that San Leandro has had is improving a lot of the bicycle and pedestrian access to the downtown and major areas. And this is something that many of the cities in the Bay Area have been doing. But this one, I'm very happy to say, benefited me because the curb cuts are not only easy for me to find with the domes, but they also have the ramps for wheelchairs, and that makes it easier to cross over and, navigate across the road.
Yeah, it's been great, the improvement in public works around sidewalks and pathways that has happened in the last 15, 20 years, but we still have a long way to go. I'm
We
sure
do.
you still encounter do you still encounter poor curb cut design or lack of curb cuts in your travels in and around where you live and work at all?
Not in the area that I frequent.
Oh,
There are
that's wonderful.
places outside of my town that, yes, and in the outskirts, absolutely. But fortunately, in the area I go, no.
So I want you to think way back because I know it's been 12 years and that's amazing. I can't believe it's been so long since we helped you to get that home. But if we think back then, what do you remember as being the most challenging part of the process of, becoming a homeowner?
Challenging is a relative thing, right? What was challenging then is a piece of cake now, and I think for any first time homeowner, going through the process of buying the home is the challenging part. And you can pinpoint certain aspects of that as being more challenging. First, you have to find a home that might be something you'd be interested in. But just finding a home is not a guarantee, because then you have to actually be able to be pre-qualified in order to buy it and not have a competition with other people who are trying to buy it at the same time. Then there's all of the other paperwork aspects of going through the loan and mortgage process that, when you are not familiar with it, it is a bit daunting. And,
Yeah.
again, in hindsight, piece of cake. I've been fortunate to understand the process to help a number of other people in figuring out how does this ownership of a home work. But the figuring out where is a place that I would want to be, that's probably the more challenging part, because in order to answer that question, you need to have a very good familiarity with the neighborhood. And if you're looking at houses in a large section of community, you may know them generally, but you're not going to know them intimately.
Yeah. Since you've owned the home a while, I imagine you've done some work on it. Can you tell us some of the improvements you've done well, first of all, it's a 3-bedroom home, right? Or is it a 2-bedroom home?
I have a 2-bedroom home with a full basement.
Right, right. I was just going to say, and that huge backyard, which you're going to tell me about in a little bit.
Yeah.
But tell me first, what have you done since you bought the place?
So the first big improvement that I did when I bought my house was a electrical upgrade. And that was essential because I bought a very old home, 1920s, and I don't think that the electricity had really been upgraded in any full form since it was built. It had patch meal, and going from a 30 amp to a 100 amp was the first essential piece, because that's what I do, is a lot of computer work. So setting up for the power consumption capability, and then B, just having all of the circuitry done correctly. That was one big aspect. And, that ended up being a big project up front that then we keep working on here and there as new things come out. So then after that, there's been a combination of improvements and just repairs. For instance, my front steps, well, they rotted out. So it's time to replace them. And that was something that I did a few years ago. And, ended up being a really fun project. Same with the back area. I have a carport and the door needed to be replaced. So we put in a nice improvement there with the sliding door.
Wonderful. You know, it's so funny you mentioned the French steps because I remember talking to you about the French steps sometime in the first few years after you bought the place, saying, you know, you're going to need to replace these French steps at the porch.
Oh, yes.
So, so tell me, I understand you've done a fair bit of work on this full-size basement downstairs. Can you tell me a little bit about what you've done in the basement?
Yes, I've learned lots of nifty little tricks for doing home improvements. And so in the basement, when we did the, not too long after doing the electrical improvement, I went to the farmer's market downtown and came across one of the city offices booths that was advertising their improvement program for earthquake readiness.
Yeah.
And that got my attention. And so, long story short, I ended up doing a retrofit of all of the shear walls and using some of the tools that the city was able to provide as part of their earthquake improvement program. We put in bolts, we put in the shear wall. Having a full basement made that process a whole lot easier. So once you have the structure in sound shape, then it's easy to start moving on to what are the more cosmetic and aesthetic features of a living space. And well, in my case, we had a very interesting feature in the basement, which was this big bin, a cement, kind of like, yeah, big bin.
Yeah.
It could have been for coal, but actually it was for making wine. And
Wow.
this was something that I had never seen before, but yeah, they actually made wine in the basement back in the day.
Wow. What year was the home built, Jeremy? Do you remember?
1929.
1929. Wow.
Yep. So the former owner had told a story that they used to go out to Sacramento and bring a whole truckload of grapes back and do their whole winemaking in the basement. So
Wow.
it was kind of neat to see, oh, this is how things were done, but very impractical to have a big cement block, big cement canister just sitting there in my basement. So that was the first thing when we did the remodel of the basement, which was no flooring, it was just cement. We took that out and then I got tiles and we had one fun weekend of laying tiles down, not the kind that was with mortar, but just with adhesive.
Wow.
And all of those tiles now look beautiful.
So you really like the do-it-yourself approach, right? You doing these
Yep,
projects yourself, huh?
I
That's
do.
fantastic. That's great. So when you first moved in, tell me what the backyard looked like, and then tell me what you did to it.
So the backyard was pretty much, well, I should start by describing my backyard has a nice patio area, and beyond the patio, which has a little covered picnic area, there's the clubhouse. That's what I call it anyway. And beyond that is the garden. When I moved in, the garden was just an open area of kind of random vegetation. There were things that were growing there, potatoes and leeks, collards were all growing there somewhat naturally. And interestingly enough, they still are growing very
Wow.
happily in my garden. We had I guess you'd call it a little garden shed, but it wasn't big enough to actually walk into. It was more like a storage shed that made for kind of a space to put stuff. we took that out altogether because it was on the sunny side. And that
Mhm.
freed up a large area that allowed me to basically rototill the whole area and make it into a garden. We put in pavers so that there's an easy access to most of the part of the garden that we want to be able to get to easily. And then where there were grapes growing on the fence, we took the fence out and built an arbor. So now I have a full grape arbor
Wow.
in place of a fence with grapes on it.
That's great. And the chicken coop, right?
And then we we found there was a corner that had a whole bunch of trees in it, including a pear tree. Unfortunately, that pear tree was an Asian pear that had lost all of the good pear trimmings, or the good stock. So all it was root stock. I chopped that tree down because it wasn't going to ever be edible. After 2 years of trying, we gave up on that pear tree and put a chicken coop, a nice little A-frame chicken coop, right in its place. And since we put that in, I've had chickens happily living there. So over 10 years now.
And do you get eggs from these chickens?
Yes, except for when they go on vacation.
The chickens go on vacation?
The chickens go on vacation. Chickens go on vacation when the daylight drops below 14 hours of sunlight, or they've tired themselves out and are ready for a little broody rest. So
Uh-huh.
right now is the beginning of their rest period.
Wow. So how many chickens do you have?
Right now I have 8, and
Wow.
those chickens range in generations from 1 or 2 of the original that I bought and raised to very young ones that I've had only for a year and a half.
So, Jeremy, I mean, I could talk about your house. I'm sure you love talking about your house, but I do want to ask you a couple of questions that are kind of not specifically about the house. First of all, what advice would you give to a person with limited vision or who is blind who might be thinking about buying a home, or any general advice to someone who went through the process as a first-time buyer like you did? What advice would you give them when the hindsight of your experience?
Well, the first thing is, if you want to buy a house, you need to be able to put down a down payment. So before you really even start looking for a house, start saving. When you are then looking for a house, it's important to make that list of what are the key characteristics that you really want to have. And those key characteristics give that punch list that you can start using some of the online tools to get an idea of what's out there. Then more important than I thought it would be is just going and visiting different places, because there's a whole range of houses in terms of, is it a fixer upper? Is it a perfectly good house as is? Or is it one that has been basically redone with lipstick? And each of those types of houses are going to have their own kind of strings attached. If you get a fixer upper, you're going to have a lot more work to do yourself, but you can do it if you like doing that kind of work, and do it better than if somebody came along and did a lipstick job. So it depends what you're looking for, and that's where the checklist comes into play. Then getting the pre-approval and going through the process of just how do you get a loan, and working with your realtor and your loan advisor to get that process worked out is kind of daunting at first. But again, you go through it once and you'll look back and say, this wasn't that hard.
So this has been delightful, Jeremy, hearing your story. We're almost out of time. Are there any other thoughts you have about your experience that you'd like to share with people who might be listening to this?
Well, there's so many other aspects that we could dive into. For the sake of time, I think I'll just leave with a couple closing thoughts. And that is that a house for me is an asset that I can enjoy and also just not have to worry about an ongoing payment after it is paid off. So to me, that's one of the biggest factors of owning a house is just plain ownership. If you can work up bit by bit to that ability of owning a house, you'll find that it actually is more doable than you might expect. When I first bought my house, I thought it was kind of a stretch, but
Financially,
after,
you mean, right?
yeah,
Financially,
financially
home.
kind of a stretch, but after 10 years, now all of the rents in the neighborhood are more than my mortgage was when I started.
Right, right. And may I tell, are you willing to share with my listeners how much you paid for your house in 2010? Now, to
And
be fair, it was the height of the recession, but how
it
much did
was
your
the
house
height of
cost,
the
Jeremy?
recession, and I paid $320,000 for it.
And my like almost all people in at least in the Bay Area who buy their homes and live in them for more than 5 years, there is a significant increase in prices that benefits them in the
Yep,
sense of having this legacy and wealth building opportunity that sometimes dwarf what you could make from the stock market or from mutual funds or any kind of either kind of paper investment.
exactly.
Yeah,
And the factor of community ties into that. For myself, being in a neighborhood with a good school system wasn't as important as a friendly, accessible neighborhood. But that also is a factor if you're ever looking at, is this an investment that you would want to keep as such later down the road?
right. Well, this has been great, Jeremy. I want to thank you for making time to speak with me about your experience.